Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant. Before her son was born, Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his 4th. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal, and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who are raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. Christopher Moyer was born on May 21, 1967, into a middle-class family. He valued independence and believed that education was the key to achieving it. Although he didn't have many friends, this didn't bother him much, as he spent most of his free time studying. After finishing school, he attended college, where he developed a strong interest in computers and technology. His dream was to become self-employed after earning his degree. Beyond his career goals, he also dreamed of starting a family. By 2010, Christopher was 44 years old and had realized his aspirations. He was self-employed, working as his own boss, and happily married. He lived in a spacious house in Pennsylvania with his wife and son. He worked as a freelance computer specialist, assembling custom computers for clients from his home. His wife, Irina Moyer, was skilled in electronics and assisted him with his work. She was born on August 12, 1971, which made her 39 years old in 2010. Irina was originally from Ukraine and had moved to the United States in search of a better life. She met Christopher in April 2002 during a challenging time in his life. He was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, with whom he had no children. This experience left Christopher longing for a large, loving family. Irina also shares this dream and hopes to build a new life in the United States. Their relationship developed quickly, and later, that same year, they decided to get married. They began planning for their future, which included moving out of Christopher's bachelor home to a place more suitable for a family. Before they could find a new home, Irina discovered she was pregnant. In 2003, they purchased a large, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Orrington. The area was peaceful, scenic, and much safer than the bustling city where Christopher had previously lived. Although the local residents formed a close-knit community, the Moyers were more reserved, choosing to keep to themselves. Over the years, neighbors described them as withdrawn and rarely seen in the neighborhood. While they didn't socialize or attend local gatherings, they weren't entirely disconnected. For example, Christopher once arranged for shared use of a snowblower with his neighbors. However, in most cases, the family preferred solving problems independently. On September 25, 2003, Irina gave birth to their first and only child, Dylan Moyer. By 2010, Dylan was 7 years old and thriving in school. Having successfully completed the first grade, he was a bright, intelligent child, and his parents were incredibly proud of him. Teachers, both from his kindergarten and primary school, regularly praised Dylan for his abilities. Much of his success stemmed from the active involvement of both his parents in his education. Being highly educated themselves, Christopher and Irina prioritized their son's learning and supported him every step of the way. While they avoided participating in the neighborhood's social life, they always attended school meetings together, demonstrating their dedication to helping Dylan succeed in both academics and life. Christopher was known as a calm, grounded individual, and his wife, Irina, shared many of his qualities. Both were thoughtful and quiet, preferring action over conversation. Their closest neighbor, Rose Radziul, knew them better than anyone else in the area. Although they were on friendly terms, Rose described Christopher and Irina as reserved, meek, and silent. Their interactions with her rarely extended beyond simple greetings and polite exchanges. Notably, Rose noticed that Christopher had a tendency to be controlling and domineering towards Irina. She noticed that Irina seemed to become more withdrawn when she was with Christopher, often avoiding communication so as not to upset him. Their son, Dylan, however, was different. Teachers regarded him as an exceptionally bright and curious boy. By kindergarten, he had a vocabulary beyond his years and often impressed or puzzled adults with his questions. Dylan's primary school teacher was particularly fond of him, recognizing his great potential early on. Instead of playing typical games for children his age, Dylan showed an interest in scientific literature, often reading during his free time. Like his parents, he was not highly social, but he maintained good relationships with his peers. Irina was described as a loving and devoted mother who prioritized her son's well-being and development. Despite her shy and unsociable personality, Christopher, similarly, was regarded as a caring father, deeply invested in Dylan's well-being. According to relatives, the family had created a warm and nurturing home environment, rooted in love for each other and their child. A few months before the tragedy, the family had even taken a trip to Disneyland, making the events of June 17, 2011 all the more shocking. At 9:40 p.m. on that fateful Friday, 44-year-old Christopher called emergency services. He calmly confessed to killing his wife and son with a baseball bat, stating that both were dead and refusing to offer any first aid. His cold and detached tone during the call was unsettling, as if he were discussing something mundane. He gave a detailed account of the crime, describing how he had killed Irina by beating her to death before attacking their son Dylan. He even supplied his personal information and the family's home address, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. Emergency responders rushed to the Moyer family home, where they encountered a chilling scene. When no one answered the door, authorities initially suspected Christopher had barricaded himself inside and might be armed. A note taped outside listed the names and contact details of relatives, suggesting that Christopher had prepared for what was to come. Neighbors began to gather, watching the tense situation unfold. The police believed Christopher might resist arrest, but then someone noticed one of the family's cars was missing. This raised the possibility that Christopher had fled. By 2 a.m., officers entered the home through an open garage door. They proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, but found no one alive inside. Instead, they were met with a gruesome scene. On the second floor, they discovered two bodies, 7-year-old Dylan and 39-year-old Irina. Both had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object, their skulls brutally disfigured. Irina's body was found in the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom. Bloodstains and drag marks suggested that her body had been moved there after the attack. A towel was also placed over her face, a gruesome detail that added to the haunting scene. Christopher, however, was nowhere to be found. Dylan's room was nearby. He was found in his bedroom with injuries similar to those of Irina. A bloody baseball bat, believed to be the murder weapon, was lying next to his body. The bat was sent to a lab for analysis, as the caller on the emergency line had predicted. The police activity quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors, especially Rose, who was close to the family. When Rose goes to find out what is going on, she is horrified by the brutal attack on the Moyer family, and is even more shocked when she hears Christopher confess over the phone that he killed his own family. The police immediately questioned Rose, hoping she might have heard or seen something since she was at home during the time of the murders. However, Rose stated that she hadn't heard any screams or disturbances, only the sound of a car engine leaving the Moyer residence, which she assumed was Christopher fleeing the scene. She also noted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual or any warning signs of such a violent event. Rose shared detailed information about the family, with the police being particularly interested in Christopher, who was missing. They needed to determine the direction he might have gone in and whether he had taken a weapon with him, as one neighbor had suggested. Christopher had reportedly told the emergency dispatcher that he planned to wait for the police to arrive. Yet, for reasons unknown, he was gone by the time officers reached the crime scene. Rose described Christopher as calm and introverted, adding that she couldn't imagine him committing such an atrocity. She noted that, although he wasn't very affectionate towards his wife, they seemed happy in public, and she had never seen him argue with his wife or scold his son. Forensic experts and detectives thoroughly combed the crime scene, working to piece together what had transpired. No signs of a break-in were discovered, and all the available evidence pointed to Christopher's responsibility for the attack. Fearing that his mental state had deteriorated and that he might harm someone else, authorities launched an urgent manhunt. Despite this, Christopher's actions didn't fit the profile of a typical serial killer or maniac. 2 hours after police arrived at the house, they were still searching intensively for Christopher. They tried reaching him on his mobile phone, but he didn't respond to any calls. During the investigation, security footage from a nearby camera captured Christopher's car, narrowing down the potential routes he could have taken. Road services and patrol units were alerted and stationed at strategic points in an effort to intercept him. Yet Christopher seemed to have vanished. At 12:56 a.m., a witness from a neighboring town called Hadborough rang the police. The caller, a train engineer, reported finding a body on the railway tracks. Tragically, the man on the tracks matched Christopher's description. According to the engineer, the train was unable to stop in time to avoid hitting the man. Authorities arrived at the scene and found a body later identified as Christopher through documents found in his possession. His pocket contained $300 in cash and car keys. A dark Toyota Camry, registered to Christopher, was located near the railroad crossing. The police concluded that Christopher had deliberately ended his life shortly after the murders. He appeared to have been familiar with the train's schedule and intentionally positioned himself on the tracks to coincide with the arrival of an oncoming train. As a result, the entire Moyer family died, leaving many unanswered questions about this horrific incident. Irina's parents, along with her brother and sister-in-law, were in a neighboring town when the news broke. The police contacted them to inform them of the deaths of Irina, Dylan, and Christopher. During questioning, the family revealed that the Moyers had planned to visit them that weekend. According to their plans, Christopher, Irina, and Dylan were supposed to drive over on Saturday night. After the visit, Dylan was meant to stay with his grandparents for a few days, while his parents spent time alone together, with the grandparents later returning Dylan home. The tragic events, however, unfolded just days before this planned visit. Shortly before the tragic events, Irina's parents tried to call her, but their calls went unanswered. They were not overly concerned, assuming the family had gone to bed early to prepare for their long journey. Relatives of theirs stated that they had spoken with the Moyers on Friday morning, when both Irina and Christopher seemed cheerful and did not mention any issues. They were busy making final preparations for their trip. Neither Irina nor Christopher had a history of mental health problems, which made the tragic events even more shocking. Christopher's parents were also informed of the tragedy. His father reported speaking with him on the same day and noted nothing unusual or alarming. Christopher had mentioned extending a contract with a major client, which made him optimistic about his upcoming weekend plans and improving his financial situation. Their family had been dealing with financial struggles recently due to the instability of freelance work. Christopher had expressed concerns about potentially losing their home, but the issue appeared to have been resolved. It seemed he was simply worried that such financial difficulties could return. When friends and family were questioned, none could provide a motive for the tragedy. Christopher, described as a loving husband and father, seemed incapable of such violence. What could have driven him to kill his entire family and take his own life? Their family was private, rarely sharing details of their personal lives. The medical examiner's office conducted autopsies on Irina and Dylan. Both were found to have died from multiple blunt force head injuries inflicted with extreme force and determination. However, these findings provided no insight into why Christopher, a man with no history of depression or violent tendencies, would commit such a horrific act. Family members described Irina as loyal to her husband, leading a quiet life with minimal social interactions beyond her neighbors and her child's teachers. Their relationship was considered healthy and loving. Christopher was seen as a hard-working man who provided for his family and never displayed depressive behaviors or violent tendency. Adding to the mystery, Christopher left no suicide note to shed light on what led to this devastating act. Key documents found in the house revealed crucial details. Investigators discovered that the family was at risk of losing their $450,000 home. Christopher had received a foreclosure notice just days before the tragedy, and they lacked the funds to resolve their financial troubles. This crushing reality may have driven Christopher to despair. It is believed that he had planned to harm himself, but in his state of anguish and loss of reason, he could not bear to leave his wife and children to face poverty and hardship. He may have convinced himself that killing his family was a way to shield them from future suffering. Despite this theory, the exact motive remains uncertain. Detectives carefully examined all evidence and consulted psychiatric experts on such behavior. Typically, such actions are linked to underlying mental health problems. However, Christopher had no diagnosed mental health illnesses and exhibited no signs of significant struggles beforehand. Relatives shared that Christopher had been deeply stressed by financial issues. Their family had previously faced the threat of losing their home in 2006, but succeeded in overcoming the challenge. The family lived modestly, but this time, the situation appeared dire and irreparable. There was no evidence to suggest that Christopher had been struggling with severe mental health issues or that he had planned the tragedy long in advance. Experts instead believe the decision may have been impulsive, driven by the overwhelming tension that Christopher had quietly been battling on his own. Christopher's father was aware that his son would never seek help from a psychiatrist, no matter how severe the situation became. There had been a suspicion that Christopher might have used illegal substances, but this was proven false. Toxicological tests confirmed that his blood was clean. However, this detail provided another clue: Christopher was not taking any prescribed medication, indicating that he had avoided seeking medical help for his anxiety or other possible issues. The forensic investigation continued, uncovering troubling evidence. The blood found on a baseball bat near Dylan's body was identified as belonging to both Dylan and Irina. Fingerprints on the other end of the stick showed it was Christopher's. Besides, footprints and additional evidence from the family home allowed investigators to piece together the tragic sequence of events. The Friday morning when the tragedy unfolded had seemed normal, but Christopher had likely already made his decision. A trip was planned for the following day, and his wife and son went to bed early that evening. Christopher, however, stayed awake, unable to sleep. At some point, he retrieved a baseball bat from the garage and waited for his family to fall into a deep sleep. He did not want to make noise or raise suspicion. Christopher's actions suggested that he wanted to carry out his plans swiftly, though calling it humane would be a stretch. He first entered the bedroom he shared with his wife and attacked her suddenly. The first blow to her head caused fatal injuries, leaving her unable to scream or resist. Christopher proceeded to strike her multiple times, breaking her skull. He likely believed that ensuring her death quickly was necessary. Irina succumbed to internal bleeding within minutes, and forensic evidence showed that she had no defensive wounds, indicating she had been caught completely off guard. Next, Christopher turned to his son, Dylan, who was asleep in his room. He killed him in the same manner, with the boy unaware of what was happening. Afterward, Christopher dragged his wife's body to the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom, leaving a blood trail behind. The reason for this act remains unknown. Additionally, he covered her face with a towel, a gesture often associated with remorseful killers who cannot bear to look at the consequences of their actions. After the murders, Christopher did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, he wrote a note listing the contact information of family members, presumably to assist authorities in reaching them. He also sent a text message to his father, apologizing. At the time, his father had no idea what had occurred and did not understand the gravity of the message. The violent events were entirely unexpected and shocking, even to those closest to Christopher. After bidding farewell to his family and leaving behind clues, Christopher called 911 to confess his actions. However, he did not wait for the police to arrive. He needed to act quickly to position himself at a reachable section of the train tracks before it was too late. This urgency may explain why he left no explanation for his actions in his note. He also chose not to leave a will, possibly because the family possessed very few valuables. Only 2 cars remained. Their most valuable property had already been lost, and they had no savings. A key document found in the house provided critical insight into the double murder. It revealed that the family had been struggling with financial problems for an extended period. Christopher's freelance work was insufficient to support a family of 3. Years earlier, he had faced the risk of losing their home for the first time. Thankfully, they managed to make the necessary payments in 2006 and kept their house. However, their financial situation deteriorated further in 2010. By September of that year, debts were mounting once again. Family members and neighbors suspected that the financial troubles were linked to money and real estate. Unfortunately, Christopher had kept his struggles private and did not ask for help, so no one realized how severe their situation had become, not even his relatives. Psychiatric experts concluded that Christopher decided to kill his family when he realized they were unable to escape their financial difficulties. In his distorted reasoning, he believed that taking their lives was the only way to spare them from a life of poverty. His disturbed state of mind led him to view this act as a twisted form of mercy. After the investigation was concluded, the case was closed. Irina and Dylan Moyer were buried together in Pennsylvania, near a city nearby. There is less information available about Christopher's funeral, but it is known that he was buried separately, far from his wife and child. Irina's family insisted on this, as they believed it was unfair to bury the murderer with Irina and Dylan. On August 16, 2023, a young woman was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, one of the top medical centers in the world, in critical condition. Her internal organs were failing quickly. She was severely dehydrated, and her body temperature was unstable. Despite the emergency treatments, Doctors were having a hard time stabilizing her because they could not identify the cause of her sudden decline. Betty Bowman, a successful pharmacist known for her commitment to health and wellness, was now fighting for her life. Her colleagues were stunned. Just the day before, she had been vibrant and energetic. Now medical professionals were urgently trying to save her. One by one, possible diagnoses were eliminated. Lab tests did not yield clear results, and her condition kept deteriorating. What could have led to such a swift decline in the health of a young, otherwise healthy woman? As doctors sought answers, they started to understand that the cause was not a typical illness. Betty was born in 1991 in Kansas. She grew up in a hard-working family that valued honesty, perseverance, and care for one another. From a young age, she showed determination and a strong work ethic in all her endeavors. She performed well in school, particularly excelling in science, developed a deep passion for biology and chemistry. After high school, she enrolled in a pharmacy program at university, where she quickly became one of the top students. Unlike many of her classmates who focused on memorizing theories, Betty was truly interested in medical processes, chemical compounds, and how medications affect the human body. After graduation, she started her career working in a pharmacy before moving to a medical facility. There, she earned the respect of her co-workers and built a reputation as a dedicated, knowledgeable professional. Connor Bowman was born in 1993 in Kansas, but his upbringing was quite different from Betty's. He was self-centered and strategic, often manipulating others to achieve his goals. Unlike Betty, he did not value hard work and integrity. Instead, he aimed to gain the most benefit with the least effort. Academically, Connor was not exceptional in school, but his charisma and quick thinking helped him handle challenging situations smoothly. He had a talent for winning over important people and presenting himself positively, choosing a career in pharmaceuticals. He attended the same university as Betty. However, his interest in medicine was not aligned with that of his peers. While they wanted to help others, Connor approached pharmacology with a focus on influence and control over the human body. Later, he pursued further education in a medical program to open up more career opportunities, elevate his professional standing. Betty and Connor met while studying at university. Despite their differing personalities, they formed a relationship. Betty admired Connor for his intelligence and ambition, while Connor appreciated the advantages of being with her. They got married in May 2021. A few months later, Betty received a job offer from the prestigious Mayo Clinic, prompting them to move to Minnesota. For Betty, this was a significant career advancement, but for Connor, it meant living in the shadow of his successful wife. At that time, he was still in school, and all financial responsibilities fell on Betty. She paid for their living expenses, his education, and daily costs. Connor did not work and depended entirely on his wife's support, eventually growing comfortable with this dynamic. As time went on, Betty's focus shifted more towards her career. She made new friends and thrived professionally, while Connor began to feel insecure and sidelined. Although they seemed like a successful couple on the surface, tension was brewing beneath. Over time, Betty started to suspect that Connor had developed deeper feelings for someone else. When she discovered the truth, her suspicions were confirmed. It wasn't just a casual affair, but genuine affection. This revelation became the breaking point for Betty, leading her to decide on a divorce. To her, it made sense, but for Connor, it meant losing his comfortable lifestyle and financial stability. He realized that post-divorce, he would be starting from scratch with debts and no safety net. Divorce wasn't in his plans. He considered another option that promised both freedom and financial gain. On August 10, 2023, Betty Bowman was at her home in Rochester, Minnesota. She had invited a close friend over for the evening to relax, catch up, and take a break from work. It had been some time since they last met. Both were excited to spend time together. Connor was also home that evening, but he typically did not join these gatherings. He usually kept to himself, showed little interest in Betty's conversations with her friends, and preferred to focus on his own activities. That day, Connor was behaving unusually. Out of the blue, he offered to make smoothies, which surprised Betty. He had never shown interest in cooking or care for her meals before. Household chores always fell to her. This unexpected gesture felt out of character for him. Connor went into the kitchen, collected the ingredients, and began making the drinks. Betty's friend noticed his excitement and was slightly surprised, but didn't give it much thought. Betty also didn't question it, although suggested something was off about his behavior. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses. When Betty took a sip, she quickly realized something was wrong. The drink had a bitter, slightly salty aftertaste that felt unusual. She frowned, perplexed by the strange flavor. Her friend, intrigued by the reaction, decided to give it a try too. The taste was indeed horrible, and the smoothie was ruined. However, no one considered what might have caused the bad flavor. They just set the glasses aside and moved on. Connor didn't offer any explanation. He didn't suggest making another batch, didn't explain the strange taste, and showed no interest in the fact that the drink was undrinkable. Betty quickly brushed off the incident, thinking he simply made a bad smoothie. However, it wasn't an accident. It was actually the first attempt, which failed because she hadn't finished the drink. Connor recognized his error and realized that next time he needed to ensure it turned out better. On August 14th, 2023, everything appeared normal at the Bowman home. Betty returned late from a long day at work, feeling exhausted after spending hours in the lab, discussing new pharmaceutical research with her colleagues. She just wanted to relax, have a quick dinner, and get some rest. Connor recognized this was a crucial moment for him. His first attempt a few days earlier had failed because the taste was too evident. He had learned from his mistakes and was determined to be more careful this time. Throughout the day, he researched how the added substance would affect the body and calculated the precise amount needed to induce a severe reaction without immediate effects. He waited for the perfect moment when Betty was tired and less likely to notice anything unusual. When she entered the kitchen, he casually offered her a smoothie. He acted relaxed to avoid arousing her suspicion. Betty accepted the glass, took a few sips, and finished the smoothie calmly. This time, the taste seemed perfectly normal. Connor had thoughtfully adjusted the ingredients to hide any unusual flavors. That evening, Betty started to feel unwell. She felt a bit tired and had a mild headache. Thinking it wasn't serious, she didn't think much of it. However, by the morning of August 15th, her condition had deteriorated. She woke up with a severe headache, nausea, and extreme exhaustion. Shortly after, she began to have serious stomach problems. Her body was losing fluids quickly, and even a small sip of water made her feel sick again. By midday, Betty's condition had worsened. She struggled to get out of bed, feeling as if her body was heavy. Her temperature was gow, and her muscles hurt. By evening, her weakness intensified to the point where walking to the bathroom became difficult. She was very dehydrated, and she kept feeling sick. Every time she tried to eat, she felt even worse. On August 16th, she recognized that she could no longer take care of herself. She felt so weak that even a simple phone call was tiring. She contacted the Mayo Clinic to explain her symptoms. Later that day, Betty Bowman was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. She was dangerously dehydrated. Her blood pressure was unstable, and she had a high temperature. Doctors quickly initiated a thorough evaluation, but they could not determine the cause. Initial tests indicated severe complications affecting her internal organs. The most alarming finding was in her intestines, where scans showed areas of dead tissue. This meant that parts of her digestive tract were not getting enough oxygen and had started to die. Emergency surgery was performed to remove the damaged part of her body, but doctors were uncertain if the issue had spread further. After the surgery, she was placed in intensive care and connected to life support machines. Unfortunately, her condition worsened. Within hours, her kidneys began to fail, and she needed dialysis. The situation escalated when, on August 18th, her liver also showed signs of trouble. Tests revealed a significant increase in liver enzymes, indicating toxic damage. The medical team was perplexed by Betty's condition. She was a young, healthy woman without any history of chronic illness. Why was her health deteriorating so rapidly? During this time, Connor Bowman showed unusual determination. He often told doctors that his wife had a rare genetic condition called hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, HLH. This was odd because HLH usually appears in early childhood, and Betty had never shown any symptoms of it. The doctors looked into her medical history and found no signs of the condition. Even more alarming, Connor was informing friends and family that Betty was dying from this disease, even though the medical team had not diagnosed her with it. On August 19th, Betty's health took a severe turn for the worse as she experienced multiple organ failure. Her heart, kidneys, and liver stopped functioning properly, and fluid built up in her lungs, making it hard for her to breathe. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the situation looked dire. On August 20th, 2023, at 2:50 p.m., Betty Bowman, 32, was declared dead. The medical team could not determine the exact cause of her death. However, her husband's lack of questions and his behavior raised some concerns. He did not seem to seek answers, inquire about possible causes, or request further examination. Instead, he appeared to act as if he already anticipated the outcome. After Betty's death, doctors recommended an autopsy because Betty's unexpected decline was puzzling, and standard protocols call for a post-mortem examination. However, Connor firmly opposed this. He asserted that Betty had always expressed a desire not to have her body used for medical research. This declaration surprised the staff at the Mayo Clinic, as it is common for families to seek answers when someone who seemed healthy dies suddenly. Most families typically request additional tests and clarifications. In contrast, Connor was resolute in insisting that no autopsy be conducted and that there should be no further investigation. Law enforcement officers involved in the case noted that his behavior was suspicious. He not only refused an autopsy, but also rushed to make funeral arrangements. Just hours after Betty's death, he submitted the cremation paperwork and wanted it done quickly. However, doctors stepped in because they were not convinced her death was from natural causes. They decided to pause the cremation to conduct further investigations. The next day, Connor began writing an obituary, which revealed another strange aspect of the case. He did not mention Betty's mother and sister, the two people closest to her. Instead, he only referenced himself and their dog. This made it seem like he was intentionally downplaying Betty's family ties, almost trying to erase parts of her life. Around this time, Connor invited an acquaintance over for drinks. The acquaintance later noted that they had expected to find a grieving husband in distress. However, when they arrived at the house, they saw Connor looking relaxed and even cheerful. During their conversation, he showed no signs of sadness, didn't mention what had happened, and seemed unfazed for someone who had just lost his wife days earlier. Just days after the funeral, Connor started openly talking about the $500,000 life insurance payout he received after his wife's death. It seemed like he was satisfied with how things had turned out. Many people respected Betty both professionally and personally. Those close to her expected her husband to be deeply affected by her loss. However, he appeared relaxed. Some who overheard his discussions noted that he talked about the insurance money as if it had resolved his financial issues instead of representing the loss of his wife. Investigators became particularly interested in Connor's financial situation after discovering that he had been facing considerable debt while in school. He had accumulated substantial student loans that continued to increase. Unlike Betty, who had a stable and well-paying job, Connor was financially dependent. As he was still completing his medical training, his residence salary was insufficient to meet their expenses. As investigators examined his behavior following Betty's death, more troubling details came to light. Even before he received the insurance payout, he did not try to find other sources of income and showed no concern for his financial future. This raised questions. If Betty's death had truly been unexpected, shouldn't he have been eager to find answers? Wouldn't he have asked the doctors questions, sought explanations, or requested additional tests? Instead, he appeared to act as if he already knew what had happened, suggesting that any further inquiry would only complicate things for him. Detectives ultimately determined that Connor's financial difficulties could have been a significant motive for the crime. He had a strong incentive to benefit from his wife's death, as he stood to gain much more financially than he would have from a divorce. Friends and family of Betty were shocked that someone so close to her could plan such a cruel act for financial gain. Connor's behavior, his emotional detachment, and his financial problems suggested that Betty's death may not have been an accident. Investigators collected blood samples from Betty taken during her hospital stay. The tests revealed a startling finding. Her blood contained a dangerously high level of colchicine, a substance used in medical treatments that can be fatal in large amounts. Colchicine is not commonly linked to intentional poisoning, as it is hard to obtain without professional access. It is mainly used to treat gout, but its toxic effects can be very harmful if misused. The symptoms of an overdose aligned perfectly with Betty's condition, starting with nausea, stomach problems, and weakness, and progressing to organ failure and intestinal necrosis. After obtaining this information, investigators started to explore who might have access to the substance. Their investigation soon pointed to Connor Bowman. With a medical background, he possessed the knowledge to use colchicine effectively. Even more alarmingly, he had previously worked at a poison control center, studying how toxic compounds affect the human body. This finding was the first significant clue suggesting he could be linked to the incident. Detectives began interviewing Betty's friends and family. Her close friend, who was at Betty's house on August 10th, recounted a peculiar incident involving a smoothie. The friend noted that the drink tasted bitter and slightly salty. Initially, they both thought the smoothie had simply spoiled. She also remembered joking at the time that Connor might have tampered with the drink. They laughed off the remark then, but now it felt much more serious. This detail caught the investigators' attention, as it suggested that someone might have attempted to poison Betty even before she was hospitalized. If the first attempt had a low dose, it seemed reasonable to believe that Connor might have tried again, using a stronger concentration of the substance. Betty's family, including her mother and sister, revealed that in the weeks before her death, she had been seriously thinking about getting a divorce. They recalled her expressing unhappiness in her marriage and her intention to separate. All the evidence suggests that Betty's death might not have been a tragic accident, but instead a carefully planned crime. After confirming the presence of colchicine in Betty's system, investigators sought additional evidence. They secured permission to search Connor's workspace at the Mayo Clinic, where he was completing his medical residency. A review of his work computer uncovered troubling information. His browser history included searches like lethal dose of colchicine, how to hide traces of poison, can police track search history, and how to erase purchase records on Amazon. These searches were significant to the investigation, suggesting that Connor had researched fatal dosages beforehand and was actively looking for ways to conceal his actions. Investigators looking into Connor Bowman's online accounts found that he had bought substances not connected to his medical practice. These substances included colchicine and sodium nitrate, raising further alarm. Although sodium nitrate is often used in the chemical and food sectors, it can be toxic in higher doses. The investigators determined that Connor was experimenting with various compounds, trying to find a subtle method to harm his wife without attracting attention. The investigation also revealed that Connor was claiming to be a widower on the dating app Bumble even before his wife's death. A woman who met him on September 5th reported to investigators that she asked him if it was appropriate to flirt with someone else after his wife's passing. Connor said it was a good question and that he was open to dating again. He expressed that he knew what he wanted in life and believed that Betty would have wanted him to move on and be happy. The documents state that he told her his wife had died from listeria poisoning earlier in the summer. Additionally, another woman who met Bowman on August 29th, just 9 days after Betty's death, found it odd when he mentioned a significant life insurance payout he received, which he used to pay off his student loans. On October 20th, 2023, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Connor Bowman. By then, there was substantial evidence against him, including lab reports, his search history on his work computer, and his suspicious behavior after Betty's death. He was arrested in the early morning at his home in Rochester, Minnesota. Officers arrived with the warrant, and Bowman was taken into custody without putting up a fight. He remained calm and showed no aggression, but he also did not try to defend himself, which caught the attention of investigators. The court set Bowman's bail at $2 million, but he could not afford to pay it. After his arrest, his financial situation changed dramatically. His accounts were frozen and his assets were investigated without access to his funds. He stayed in custody while waiting for his trial. Meanwhile, investigators worked to collect more evidence to fully understand the crime. They looked into his communications, financial records, and relationships with colleagues and acquaintances to identify potential motives, find any additional incriminating information. The legal process was just starting, but it was already evident that Connor Bowman would face justice. After his arrest, Betty's family and friends called for the toughest punishment available. They were certain that her death was the result of a premeditated crime. They sought a life sentence, convinced that someone who could commit such a deliberate act should never be released. The prosecution was diligent in building a strong case, making sure the evidence was compelling and undeniable. Although the trial had not begun yet, the evidence clearly indicated Connor's guilt. Betty's family endured a painful wait for justice. They found it hard to accept that someone she had trusted, who had been in her life for many years, had betrayed her in such a devastating manner. Her mother and sister remembered conversations where Betty had shared her unhappiness and her desire to move on, never expecting that things would turn out so tragically. Betty's friends played an important role in the case. Several of them served as witnesses, sharing valuable testimony and information that strengthened the investigation. They supported her family in their quest for justice, ensuring that the responsible individual would be held accountable. Connor Bowman was charged with second-degree murder in the summer of 2023 in the death of Betty Bowman, but a grand jury indicted him on first-degree murder in January 2024. Connor Bowman's trial has not happened yet. The law enforcement is still collecting evidence and getting ready for the court case. However, a trial date has not been established.